Okay, that's the short version of the talk that I'm giving. It was longer, but we had to cut it down. The slide wasn't big enough. And that's who I am and what my title is at the moment at Narrabri Shire Council. No guarantee that'll be my title when I get back on Monday. It's like that in Narrabri. This is a picture of one of our 8 transfer stations from approximately 18 months ago. And I say it's a transfer station and that's what it was called and that's what it was designed to be. But unfortunately I've got a series of photos like this that clearly show that there wasn't a hell of a lot of transferring going on. I think in most rural and regional areas there's councils who have probably got very similar situations and problems where communities have for many years had their own little tip site that they're very connected to and that they're very protective of, and any talk about changing their little town tip can cause a lot of angst and can cause anger in the community. 18 months ago we had 1 landfill at Narrabri and 8 of these sort of transfer stations. I was on my second week at Narrabri, the EPA came along for a visit and made it very clear that we were on the cusp of prosecution and they weren't really pleased with our idea of transferring waste. I found it a little hard to disagree with them, promised them my firstborn that I would fix it. Little did they know that I would have given away my firstborn anyhow. No, he's not here, that's okay. I've got 5 kids, I wouldn't miss one surely. So I was given 6 months basically to come up with a bit of a plan as to how we're going to fix this situation. Again, as would happen with a lot of rural councils and small councils, they had at Narrabri been a very good plan 7 or 8 years ago where they did actually set up these sites with fences and with gates, and they did actually put in front lift bins and some ramps, but then made the very brave decision never to man the sites or never to shut the gates. So they became 24/7 tipping sites, unmanned and unsupervised. The problem, however, wasn't just one that was being created by Narrabri Shire Council residents. Anyone want a cheap car? There's one. It was also a problem that was coming from surrounding councils. We've got Moree, Gunnedah and Koona close to us, and they all have landfills where they've got people on the gate and where they're charged to dump. Also the main Narrabri landfill, we've got people on the gate and there's a fee to dump your waste. So these small transfer stations became very popular for a weekend drive. There's lots of anecdotal evidence actually about dads taking their son out for a drive with his L plates on the weekend with the boot loaded of rubbish, and they'd go to the Maules Creek transfer station for a driving lesson and dump all their rubbish for free and leave again. So these small transfer stations, rural transfer stations, were bearing the brunt of 3 or 4 different council areas and taking an amount of waste that they were never designed to take. The sites had originally been designed so that there were separate stockpiles for bulky goods, for green waste and for scrap metal, but being unsupervised they quickly became just enormous piles of mixed waste. The other real problem that we found that we were having was that there was some commercial operators who found out about these wonderful free sites and were making midnight visits or otherwise. Tyres were becoming a real issue. I didn't know there were so many bloody trucks in Narrabri. We were getting truckloads of tyres appearing overnight, obviously not locally sourced, but the word was out that there was a waste facility site there of sorts. Their gate was open and it was unfettered access. We're also receiving loads of other material at times like asbestos and mixed C&D waste that was obviously quite a problem. So what did we do? What was the plan? I must admit I drove around these sites for the first month or so of getting there and thought, oh bloody hell, I wonder if my job's still available at casino, which I'd left previously. Took a deep breath and thought, no, we can do something with this. So we came up with a bit of a plan. The 2 main barriers at Narrabri to ever closing the gates on the transfer stations that were built, or manning them, had been that there was a belief both in staff and council that if we did something like that, there would be a huge community backlash, and that all of those small communities who had always had their own tip and it was their facility and it was their right, would revolt, and that we'd have massive problems with illegal dumping, and that the councillors in particular would get a lot of negative feedback. I had some discussions with the EPA about what we could do and what sort of a plan we could come up with, and they were extremely cooperative. They were very good in particular about letting me use them as the scapegoat. They were very keen to see the problem resolved, and they weren't worried too much as if they were the ones who ended up being the big bag bogey in the process. So they gave me approval of sorts. Maybe I carried it a bit further than they meant, but approval of sorts, to say to the community that the reason that we needed to do something with these transfer stations was that the EPA were on the verge of fining us, and if we didn't do something with them that was positive, they'd end up being closed and they'd have no facility at all. So we then went out to the community with this plan of opening the gates on the transfer stations and having them open only certain days per week, and in most of the transfer stations it's 2 half days a week, 1 day during the week and 1 half day on a weekend. But still no gate fee, but the site controlled and managed. We did that by writing to every rural ratepayer in the council area and explaining to them what we were going to do and why we were planning to do it. We also, in that letter, explained that we're going to have a series of public meetings, and if they were concerned about their landfill stroke transfer station being closed or gated or manned or limited hours, then please come along, have your say, and we'll be there to listen to what you've got to say. So that's what we did. We went out and we had 8 of these meetings. We had them in all of the little rural towns, and we were talking before about small towns with 800 services. Well, we're talking about little towns like Barnbar, Edgeroy, Ballatta, Wobbegar, where there's 30 or 40 houses. Mind you, 30 or 40 houses, and I still got 70 or 80 people turn up to each of these meetings. I don't bug it if I know where they came from. But they came out of the woodwork and they were very keen to have their say. So what we did was I went along to all of the meetings and did the presentations. I had a bit of a PowerPoint. Most of the meetings started a little tense, I suppose, is one way of putting it. But generally speaking, by the end of the hour, after talking to the community and making it clear to them that they would still have a facility, although limited in access, and that we were at a point now where, because of regulation and because we were under scrutiny and because of the interaction with the EPA, we had to do something, and this really was a best fit. By the end of the meetings, the community listened. And I think that's one thing that had happened at Narrabri, and I think happens a lot of other places. People tend to underestimate the ability of the community to adapt and to understand and to accept change. Those public meetings did come up with a couple of suggestions about opening hours. A couple of the larger towns, when I say larger towns, instead of 20 houses, they had 40 houses. They ended up with 3 half days a week instead of 2 half days a week. And what we did after all the community meetings, we went back, there was a report to council. Council made a decision about what we were going to do. And then we wrote back to all of the residents and let them know about the changes that we were made and what we're going to implement and the timetable of implementation. So what did we do on all of the sites? The first big step was to remove all the putrescible waste that was on the sites. There was piles there of 1,000, 1,500 cubic metres on all of the sites. As I said, they'd originally been separate piles of bulky goods, scrap metal and green waste, but they turned into massive piles of just mixed waste. So the first thing was to remove those piles. I had discussions with the EPA about the best method of doing that. Picking it up and transporting it back to Narrabri really wasn't an option. But as I said, most of these sites had at one stage or another been landfills. Out the back of the sites there were still the old divots of half-filled trenches, and we got approval in this instance to reopen those trenches, move the waste that was stockpiled on these sites into the trenches, compact it, use soil from the site to dome over where the old trenches were, put in a stormwater diversion trench on the top side so that surface water wasn't going to be running through the trench area, and the EPA was happy that that was a practical and sensible solution in this sort of instance to clean up the site and resolve the issue. So that was the first thing, removing all of the waste. Part of that process was, though, that we went through all of the waste with an excavator and a grab and pulled out as much scrap metal as we could. It was surprising how much was mixed in with all the crap that was on the sites. And after our scrap metal contractor went around to all of the sites, we had $85,000, $90,000 worth of scrap metal from the sites was pulled out. That went a long way to paying for some of the stuff that we had to do on these sites to get them into shape. We also went around and we redid all the fencing, or fixed up the fencing and the gates on the sites that they actually shut. One thing that came out of the public meetings that we did put in was this. We put in a little man gate. It was something that I wasn't particularly keen on, to be honest, but we ended up putting in a little man gate like this on each of the sites, so that if somebody did turn up out of hours and they had 2 bags of rubbish, they could walk through the man gate, dump it into the bins and still get rid of their waste. That actually got a lot of the community on side. It was something that came out of the community meetings. It was something that we discussed with council and decided to do, wrote back to the community and let them know. And I think, to be honest, that made the process a lot easier, because people felt that if they needed to dump their 2 bags of rubbish at midnight on Saturday night, they still could. Oh, really? All of our sites are, as I said now, generally open 2 half days a week. They're manned by a council officer. But all of the sites are free of charge. And part of the way that we funded this is by introducing a domestic waste levy on people's rates. We did originally have one in the rural areas that was supposed to run the transfer stations. It didn't. In Narrabri itself, at the main landfill, we had gate fees. We got rid of the gate fees in Narrabri. Everybody in the whole council area now pays a domestic waste levy on their rates, and that, to be honest, has cross-subsidised and helped fund the operation of our transfer stations. Gate fees were extremely unpopular in Narrabri, which is why everyone went out to the free transfer stations. Again, it's been a bit of a win where we are now getting our money up front. We know how much money we've got to operate every year. People don't complain when they come to the gate, because they come in with their 6x4 trailer load of rubbish and can dispose of it for free. I suppose the other thing that I should say is that on all of these sites, there was the work of sorting the waste, putting up the fencing, fixing up some of the ramps, and we've got front lift bins on all of these sites. We've gone with the front lift bin system because that's what our contractor has, and that we're already under contract for that. I was a bit dubious as to how it worked. To be honest, it works quite well, although obviously bulky goods don't fit in so well. Our bulky good build-up on site, though, isn't large, because we're restricting disposal on these sites to domestic waste only. Again, there's some more of the front lift bins. We installed security on all of the sites. That was partly for security reasons on the site, although God knows why people break into sites and steal rubbish. But we have mainly got it there from a OHS, WHS, whatever point of view, because we've only got a single staff member out on these sites. We haven't got power. A lot of the sites haven't got mobile coverage. So we've got cameras, solar powered, up on these pivoting poles. Everything gets recorded on the SD card. To date, they're in a metal box. They're pretty well secured. You can't pivot the pole down without undoing half a dozen padlocks. We haven't had any pinched yet, have we, Christian? No, we haven't had any pinched yet. And there's some barbed wire, so you can't climb up the pole. It stops the possums getting up there too, I suppose. So yeah, there's the cameras and the solar panels. Seem to work quite well. Camera's quite high res, so we can read number plates, see faces, whatever we need to. One of our separated steel piles, that's what our stockpiles now look like on these transfer stations. So our steel pile is just a steel pile. We have separate bins for commingled recycling. They also get serviced by our contractor. Green waste piles are just green waste piles. And that's our bulky goods pile and some pallets. But again, we service those twice a year with a truck and an excavator and haul that in separately. Sometimes stuff does go wrong though, so although it sounds like a perfect story, occasionally something will go wrong on your site, but take a deep breath, it doesn't matter. And that's what all of our sites now look like. Oh, bugger me, that might be my backyard. Just a couple of quick take-home things, and there goes the bell. Just glad you're not Mike Tyson. Wouldn't have any ears by now. Change isn't that hard. Your community will accept change better than you think it will. Trust them, they will adapt, they will get used to it. If you explain it properly, they'll listen and they'll come along with you. Money is an excuse, not a reason not to do things. You can always find the money if you need to. Be a bit innovative, look for other sources and other ways of doing things. Get help. And, I'd forgotten, sorry. Get help is one that was put in by my admin assistant when she typed this up, because it says you cannot commence a project without a project this large without an efficient and outstanding administration officer to help you. Funnily enough, I don't remember dictating that, but she's actually... I did read it and I thought I must leave it in because she's bloody right. I wouldn't have been able to do this by myself. I'm computer agnostic. I've only just mastered an iPhone. So yeah, look, you really do need some help. Don't try and do it by yourself. Do what you say you're going to do. A really important thing with this project was on day one when we shut the gates, the first time that people went in when they were manned, we had the sites cleaned up. They looked better, they smelt better, there weren't fires, there weren't rats and cats and God knows what everywhere. So the sites look considerably different, and it's really important that you make sure that you can do that. It's not all pain. There was a fair bit of pain through the process, but it's not all pain. You get to the end, the main comment we get now about our transfer stations is how bloody good they look. And we get a lot of that sort of feedback from the community, which after 18 months is quite gratifying. And the final thing I'd like to say, and I'm not sure I even thought I would say this, but the EPA is your friend. This isn't a paid announcement. Yeah, okay. Yes, I should be knocked out after that. Thank you very much.